To another episode of Mystic Skeptics Uncensored radio show. Today we have a very complicated subject to discuss, and I know it's in everybody's hearts and minds at this time. And I have to do a couple of disclaimers before we start, but we have a special guest, Raphael. He's a religious Jew who lives in Israel. Would you call where you live a colony of the state of Israel in the West Bank, or how would you call the area that you live?
No, David, we're well within the Green Line. So
Okay.
we're about 45 minutes from Jerusalem and an hour from Tel Aviv.
Okay, so you're not a settler.
No.
Okay, not that we're coming after any group, but I want you to share what you describe on Facebook. And the only thing that I wonder is that there's propaganda on both sides, and I have heard that some of the things that Israelis have shared as their experience has been questioned as propaganda from the Israeli state. So we're just going to leave it as what you have heard and what you have experienced, and we're going to let the audience make up their mind. But go ahead and tell us your post from Facebook.
Well, it's funny. Well, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. I mean, look, it's been a rough time here, and so I was sort of the background for this post on Facebook was the company I work in. I work in an international company. Most of the employees are in the United States, and so there was a lot of discussion on the company chat about Israel and about the situation. And I was seeing a lot of this, and I just felt like something's really troubling me here. And I just went online and I just started to write. And I mean, David, you want me to read the entire post? Okay.
Yes, go
I
ahead.
went ahead and I wrote the following. I wrote, "The situation is horrific. My wife just returned from the home next door to the one in which she grew up. Their recently married son, a boy who my wife was close with growing up, was shot in the head while protecting citizens during the initial attack 9 days ago. Due to the sheer number of bodies," right, these are Israeli bodies, "his parents only learned of his death 3 days after the fact. A rocket fell today about 5 miles from my mother while she was outdoors and unprotected visiting her son's grave. My 3-year-old daughter sobs to me every time there is a rocket siren. We're in a national state of shock. Businesses are barely operating. Schools can't open. 200 of our beloved brethren are being held captive by vicious sadists." I hope I pronounced that right. I've been in Israel for a long time, okay? "Who only 9 days ago raped our girls and lopped heads off babies. As a nation, it is our responsibility to make sure this cannot happen again. The words that we uttered as Jews and the world at large joined in 1945 were more than just a mantra or an empty slogan. Never again was an oath, a commitment, a promise we made to ourselves and to each other. We can never again allow those who despise us to lead us to the slaughter. If we are to back down and allow the cruel murders of 1,400 of our people without retaliating in full force, the road to 6 million will not appear so far in hindsight. We are portrayed as the stronger actor, but we are surrounded by a pack of wolves who pray for our demise and hold their own citizens hostage so as to accuse us of cruelty. Ultimately, we hope and pray for nothing more than peace. This is beyond our ability to comprehend." And I signed it with, "We will forever stand strong under the banner of the God of Israel." And I just want to make one comment about that, because somebody did ask me if I was being a little bit dramatic. I wrote, the road to 6 million will not appear so far in hindsight. I sort of was implying that this could lead to another genocide of our people. And I may be attacked for what I'm about to say, David, but I feel that, you look what happened in 1948, you look what happened in 67, how all the nations surrounded us tried to attack at once. Now Iran is threatening to get involved in this. We are not the strongest player in this. If Iran comes in full force and Jordan decides to attack as well, and Hezbollah and Syria, and we can't handle all of that. These are nations that have, some of them for years, the Iran specifically, along with others, have said again and again, repeatedly, they want us dead. They want us dead. And if we don't stand up, David, if we don't stand up for ourselves, if we let this attack go by, this time it was 1,400. Next time it could go to 6 million, and we could have another Holocaust. And that's what we're trying to prevent here.
So I want to share my condolences for all the people who have suffered at this time. But I want to remind our audience, we're in a very progressive radio station in Nashville that has the voices of Tom Hartman, Amy Goodman, and there's another program that comes before us that is called Peace, and it's called something about there's no justice or something like that. And often they criticize Israel. Often they have Palestinian and Arab voices. And I can tell you that on many fronts, I come across as someone who's too progressive for some circles. But when it comes down to suffering, we have to listen to the voices and let them speak freely. Because if I start censoring you and say, hey, man, you're being melodramatic, or hey, man, I know that you have suffered and you're having family members and friends be fearful, but what about the people on the other side? What about what they're going through? It would be insensitive and dismissive on my part. And that's what the progressive media is saying about this call for war. And Jordan Peterson said, give them hell in relation to the Israel retaliating against Hamas in Palestine. So we're going to have to be very conscientious of how we move through this, because, again, we have to contextualize something that most people don't care about the past. They don't care about what led to this, or if they do, they've already made up their mind. They don't want to see that there was two sides and there was one thing that happened here and what happened to that. They're like, I already know that there's been a catastrophe, which that's what the Nakba means. The Palestinians were peaceful and relaxing, and then the Israelis came and colonized. That's usually how it's portrayed in America. And I know that that's not your perspective, and that's not the Israeli version of the facts. But there's a descendant of Holocaust survivors. His name is Norman Filkenstein, and I spoke to him via email in 2012 when Israel was attacking Gaza, and a lot of this stuff was coming up. They were saying that they were defenseless, that they were pinned against the wall. He actually came out in the Jimmy Dore show just recently and said that Gaza is a penal colony, that the people there are like breaking out of their oppressive jail they're in, that it is a concentration camp that they live in, and they had no choice but to attack Israel and hit them with a strong force. So I know all this stuff is offensive to you and the people who lost their lives and the people who were kidnapped, but I want you to be aware of how it's being described and the narrative that is being written. Let's say that there are some points about that. Maybe he's also being melodramatic and going a little too far. But if there's some points of that, my issue would be, what about attacking civilians? If they say that it's wrong for Israel to attack indiscriminately Gaza and to kill civilians, why is it okay for the other group to do it? And they'll say, well, because they have smaller numbers, because they don't have the technology, because they needed to, fight back somehow. And then next thing you know, they're starting to justify terrorism when they were just claiming that whatever Israel was doing in Gaza was terrorism to begin with. But you and I had a conversation before this. I sent you an article about how the number one thing that Hamas mentioned as the reason for attacking Israel was that Israeli religious folks were desecrating the Mosque of Omar. Did you get a chance to read that article?
I did not get to look through the article in depth, no.
So I'll summarize it for our audience. What it is that during Sukkot, which is one of the 4 major holidays around this time, that the people who are around the Temple Mount area, that they've been encroaching little by little. When I visited Israel in 2004, we weren't allowed to pray, carry a siddur or a prayer book, or wear a yarmulke in the temple complex. But somehow the Israeli government has allowed for people to get a little bit closer, and to pray, to wave a flag or do this and that. And then because there was a large number of people waving the lulav in an area that previously weren't allowed, that's why they were so angry. And what's crazy about that is that they've been planning this for years. So to use the desecration of the Temple Mount as the excuse, it totally changes the whole dynamic, because now we're not talking about what Filkenstein was saying, that it was a breakout, a desperate attempt to fight back, people trying to take back their land that was stolen. Now we're talking about religious war that is based on what they consider a desecration and what religious Jews would consider them having access to their holy site. As a religious Jew yourself, how do you view what's been happening? You know, there have been accounts of that, been accounts of settler violence, where some people, if they're fanaticized or they're crossing the line, they've been hurting people, and that the Israeli soldiers are supporting them, or at least turning the blind eye. How would you, as a religious person, respond to such accusations and such religious fervor to bring about the type of attack that happened?
Well, yeah, a lot of good questions, good comments there. A lot to unpack. I just want to start by saying I really appreciate your sensitivity to our pain, and I really also appreciate, this may be a surprise for some people to hear, I appreciate the sensitivity to the pain of the suffering Gazans as well. I want to put that out there. We're suffering, and there are people there who are suffering, and it's a very difficult time for everybody. And I definitely don't want to be the one to belittle anybody's suffering. And I appreciate your sensitivity. What I don't want here is, I don't want this to become a battle of narratives, right? Because we can say, look, let's let him speak, he's suffering. And then we go to the next day, let's let him speak, he's suffering. And then we say, okay, he has a narrative, which one do we identify with more? At the end of the day, there's a right here and there's a wrong here. And I at least try to put forward the case that there are some things we're doing that are wrong, but I think there's a lot that we're doing that are right, and I'm hoping we can unpack some of that.
So the first one was that they're encroaching onto the Temple Mount to us, right, and the Mosque of Omar to them. Sure. Would you find that as a fair accusation, a real thing, or is it being romanticized and exaggerated on either side?
Sure. Okay, so I'll say like this. The story of the Temple Mount is a very difficult one, because it's a holy site. It's a holy site to them. It's a holy site to us. The values that I grew up with, David, are values of diversity, values of inclusiveness, values of allowing everybody to live and let live, to worship in their own way. And I asked you, why is it that any Muslim, I go out, there are a lot of Muslims, a lot of Arabs, a lot of Muslim Arabs who come into my community to do construction work. And I think it's wonderful that they have jobs in Israel, because if we want to be an inclusive nation, everybody should have a job here. Everybody should have the right to work in whatever they want. And I walk down the street and I see a guy, one of the workers, he pulls out his prayer rug, and right in front of my synagogue, he does his prayers to Allah. And that's his right. That's his right. I would never deny him his right. I think that's a very important thing for people to have that right. What pains me, David, is that Jews don't have the same privilege in our own country. I cannot go now to the Temple Mount, which is even holier to me than it is to the Muslims. To the Muslims, it's the third holiest place in the world. To me, it's my holiest. And I can't pray there. Why am I not allowed to pray there? We talk about rights. We talk about apartheid. We strive, at least. We strive to give Muslims equal rights in every way possible here in Israel. But the areas that are controlled by the Muslims, I don't have rights. And I think, if we're going to ask the question about equality, I think we should flip it the other way around.
Okay, so the next point, Wilkenstein was saying that because there's been an ongoing occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, that they are by de facto annexed into Israel. And the religious folks would say that it's Judea and Samaria and this and that. So if they are creating colonies, and look at it any way you want, stealing land or reappropriating land or using land that is not being used or pushing people out that don't have a permit or whatever the current administration is doing with settlements. And within those settlements, the Israelis have better roads, better access to water, electricity, and all these things that the population in West Bank don't have. And there are some that get rowdy and they go burn down a vineyard or take down someone's house. That type of violence incites more terrorism and more militant responses because they feel like they have no other voice. And there's a quote that people often bring up that JFK said that if we don't support peaceful resistance, then we are allowing violent resistance because we are giving them no options. So when the Israeli soldiers, who are mostly secular, turn the blind eye and allow that to happen, it broods hatred. And so that's, you become complacent and complicit by allowing people to do those kind of things and going unpunished.
Yeah. I want to take this opportunity to denounce in every way possible violence against Israeli Arabs or Palestinian Arabs or whatever it may be that live among us. Not okay. You're right. You have violent extremists. It almost never happens. I think the last time I heard of a Jew killing an Arab as part of a hate crime, I think must have been 10 years ago, and the Jew was dealt with very severely by the authorities. But it's terrible and it should not happen. I want to make sure that's clear. However, if organizations like Hamas or like, I don't want to equate the Hamas and the PLO, but I will put them in the same sentence for technical reasons. If the Hamas and the PLO will use that as an excuse to justify violence, in retaliation, I think that's also unacceptable. Because look, David, let's look at the facts. How many Jews live in the Muslim nations? None, because they kicked us out. They killed us. We had no choice. We had to leave. How many Muslims live in Israel? Many, about 2 million. How many Jews die every year from hate crimes against Jews? I don't have the exact figures on that, but I can tell you last year, I personally heard of at least 15 cases. And I had heard of no cases of the other way around last year. We have to think about if there is violence happening, where's the main source of the violence? And I can tell you a lot more violence coming from the Palestinian side, a lot more violence coming from the other side, and we've extended olive branches, right? We offered land for peace again and again and again. It's been rejected and rejected and rejected. And finally, when they do come and they say, okay, we'll take your land, they take Gaza. We gave Gaza up in 2005 as part of a peace agreement. They took Gaza, they turned it into a place to fire rockets at us from, to train militants in, to send them in to slaughter us. And so I think we learned a lesson from there. We said, listen, until the PLO stops funding terror, because the PLO pays a salary to terrorists who are sitting in Israeli prisons, until Hamas, who currently rule in Gaza, can commit to stop killing Jews, there is nothing that we can do. We have no partner to talk about peace with.
And just so our audience knows that we're not pushing propaganda on either side, we've had 3 shows, one with the host of Middle East Tonight that gave us the history of Palestine from his perspective, which is very progressive. We had a liberal Zionist on our show who does not believe that Israel should be a Jewish state. He believes it should be the Jewish homeland, but not the Jewish state, that it should be a full democracy with people from all different places, as some of the early Zionists had. And then we did a show about Bernie Sanders and how they came after him and Rahida Tlaib and the other members of the squad because they would advocate for Palestinian rights, and in the U.S. you're not allowed to even talk about it because you are a friend of terrorists, the way that has been portrayed by the modern media. So we're not, pushing one thing or another. What we're doing is trying to get a full picture of it. And we try to get B'Tselem on the show, but they didn't want to talk about Israeli politics. They wanted to talk about what's going on in the West Bank. And they would actually disagree with you, Raphael. And they would say that every time an Israeli soldier shoots a child, a woman, or a reporter for whatever they're doing in whatever situation, which they're all different, that is a form of Israeli violence against Palestinians. And it's interesting that people don't say the current Israeli administration or that one bad soldier. They say the Israelis. And they do the same thing with Palestinians. They don't say a member of Hamas attacked a family and hurt the children. They say a Palestinian did it. They don't say a militant. They don't say a terrorist member of an organization. So the language is very dangerous because it demonizes either group. And I can tell you, and I know you have done podcasts yourself, tell me, are you a fan of the current administration of the Israeli government? Because that should be the first thing to discuss. Is what's happening part of the problem? Because there are some theories and even conspiracy theories that Netanyahu either allowed this to happen or he's rallying people around him because he has so many troubles and so many people against him, and that he actually moved troops from the Gaza border to the West Bank to look good in the eyes of the settlers, and that was what brought this about.
Okay, well, there's a few. I think there's a few questions there, and perhaps you can ask all of them as questions. A few things I'd like to respond to. I think number one, you brought up about sort of the stereotyping Israelis and Palestinians. I'll just say this: when somebody acts on behalf of their government, then we have a right to say that that government is responsible for the attack. If an Israeli soldier shoots a child, again, I'm not saying this happens, but if an Israeli soldier shoots a child and the government gives him an award for that, then you can say, yes, the Israelis shot, and I'll be on board with that sentence. The fact is, after terrorists stab Jews in the streets of Jerusalem or the streets of Tel Aviv, or after they shoot them, and they sit in our prisons, Mahmoud Abbas and the PLO, they pay him a salary. They pay him a salary every month. And he sits in jail, and his family is taken care of generously by the government. And so I say, I don't like to I don't want to come and make a stereotype for all Palestinians. I will say that the Palestinian government is very much involved in the terror against us. That's number one. Number two, regarding what you had said about, I need to write down the bullet points. I'm beginning to forget, what you had mentioned.
It was related to the current administration. Like, is it okay to say, I don't like that guy. I don't like what he's doing. I don't like how he's rallying troops around him. I don't like that he lost the confidence of the people, and now he's using this for his well-being. Are you allowed to say that, or is it you're being unpatriotic?
Yeah, I'm allowed to say that. Look, I'm not a fan of the system of government in Israel. Forget who the government is. I'm not a fan of the system. I think the system is designed in a way that our government is not as professional as it could be. Okay, I have a lot of issues with Netanyahu. I have a lot of issues with some of his ministers. But I'll say it openly. I voted for this government because the alternative was worse. I didn't believe in the alternative. I mean, they say about politics. I think back in I think it was 2016, a lot of Americans, I know members of my family at least, were like, Clinton on one side, Trump on the other side. Forget politics at the moment for a second. Trump was Trump, and Clinton had a lot of gaffes under her belt, and they were like, I don't have anybody I'm comfortable voting for. I don't have anybody I'm comfortable voting for. And they sort of, on the day of elections, they tried to keep themselves from, from vomiting all over the excuse my my wording, but from all over the voting booth. But they went and they put in a vote, and they did what they had to do. And that's sort of what I did here in Israel. I believe that the current administration is better than the alternative, and that's why I voted for them. But is there what to accuse about them? Definitely. I think something that citizens have to do in a democracy. Citizens have to step forward, and it's our duty to hold our government accountable. If we can't hold our government accountable, then we're not a democracy. And I think that's one of the things that you see in Gaza, for example. The citizens are not free to hold their government accountable. Their government is Hamas. You speak against Hamas, and you're not going to wake up the next day. And so, we would love to see the freedom that we have in Israel all across the Middle East. But unfortunately, the current scenario is that in places like Gaza, the population are being held captive by their own government, by their own leaders, and it's very sad.
Okay, so now the religious component, because the name of the show is going to be, what is a religious man supposed to do? The accusation against Zionists is not only that they want a Jewish homeland, that they want a Jewish homeland in on top of whatever was there before, which and that's where they start making accusations of some type of supremacist or nationalistic identity. As a religious person, I know that Judaism believes in a universalism in the sense of everybody's a child of Abraham or Noah, and all human beings are made in the image of God. Do you see that being emphasized? Like, if you hear that, let's say that 20% of the population of Gaza are pro-Hamas, which is a terrorist Islamist organization, and you hear that 50% of them get killed, doesn't that make your soul hurt? Or do you feel that it is part of the war process?
I don't know if those two are mutually exclusive, right? It hurts my soul very much, right? But I always say that we can learn a lot by taking our case and taking it to the most extreme scenario and learning from there. And I just want to ask ourselves, if we were talking about the Third Reich, okay, and we were talking about the Holocaust, and there are 14 million people being killed in concentration camps, what's the right thing to do? Is the right thing to come in and bomb Germany and kill civilians in order to end a war? Or is the right thing to allow the Germans to continue to do what they're going to do and decimate the gypsies, the Jews, homosexuals, whatever it was that they hated at that time? And it's a very difficult moral issue. I don't think anybody has a full answer to this question. I can tell you my take on it, and that is that these poor citizens in Gaza are being held captive by their own people. Nas Daily posted something the other day. Nas Daily posted on Twitter. Nas Daily is a world famous YouTuber. He's a Palestinian Israeli, or as he now calls himself, an Israeli Palestinian. And he wrote on Twitter, or an X as it's now called, he wrote the following. He said, "I used to call myself a Palestinian. And then I didn't understand. I was confused. I live in Israel. How am I a Palestinian?" Then he said, "I called myself a Palestinian Israeli. And then I saw the other day something that shook me. I saw Arabs coming and breaking into our country and killing other Arabs." Remember, Nas himself is an Arab. He says, "I saw them coming in and killing other Arabs. There were other Arabs who were killed in that massacre." He said, "And so I begin to wonder, should I identify first and foremost as a Palestinian? Is that really where I want to live? Do I want to live in a state of Palestine?" And he concludes with the following. He says, "I believe there should be an independent state of Palestine, but I wouldn't want to live there." And I think that speaks volumes, David. I think that such a statement speaks volumes. Um, we care about everybody. We care about everybody, and it's terribly sad what's happening to these people in Gaza. I think the two questions that we need to ask ourselves are: A, how do we end the suffering of the Palestinian people that is being inflicted onto them by their own government? That's number one. That's a question we need to ask ourselves. We're talking about the Israelis, the Israelis, the Israelis. I'm asking about the Palestinian government. What are they doing to their own people? And I want to liberate them. I want to be able to liberate them because it's terrible what they're suffering. That's number one. But I think number two is, what is a proportionate response? And like the question I posed about the Third Reich, I posed the same question here. If I have the option now to end this war, to end the killing of Jews, to end the constant fighting between Gaza and Israel that takes place every 2 years, and every time there's fighting between Gaza and Israel, Israelis die and Gazans die. If I can put an end to that now, should I do that or should I not do it? Should I let our citizens die or should I not let our citizens die? Should we wait for the next attack or should we not wait for the next attack? And I would just put this question to the audience and I'd say, look, this is a question. Often with spiritual matters, you don't have an answer that is a perfect fit for everybody. But let me pose this question to you. If you were in our situation, if you knew that tomorrow a terrorist could come and sneak into your home and massacre you and your entire family, how would you react? How would you put an end to this threat that is constantly at your border? I don't know if I have the right answer, David. I don't know if the Israeli government is capable of arriving at the right answer. But they're doing their best. They're doing their best. And I think they're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Raphael, the first thing that people are going to say, once you start throwing the term Nazi around or comparing Nazis, it can be turned against you. And I hate to do this in such a critical time. And you know that, my love is with all humanity. So I've had people throw it at me just to bring up history, to bring up the stuff that is happening. And I know it's a sore thing in the heart of Jews after losing half of your population just 70 years ago. But
can I just jump in there and clarify? There's something that Gaza and Nazi Germany have in common, and that is, in both scenarios, there was a majority of peaceful people that just wanted this to go away. In Nazi Germany, most Germans were peaceful. They didn't want it. They didn't want to see their neighbors, people who would be their neighbors and would greet them good morning every day, who they would work with. They didn't want to see them exterminated. Most Germans didn't want this. They were peaceful. And I'd say that about the Gazans as well. I'm sure there are many Gazans who just want peace. They just want peace. But ultimately, if there's a regime of terror, I don't care what regime of terror it is. It could be as bad as the Nazis, or it could be Hamas. Whatever regime of terror it is, how do you balance putting an end to such a regime while thinking about that peaceful majority that resides within their country? And that is why I'm comparing it to Germany, to point out that a peaceful majority is always going to be a question, always going to be a conflict.
Have you ever heard of the Neturi Karta?
Oh yeah.
Well, that's the first group that they don't know anything about Judaism, they don't know anything about Jews, they don't know anything about Jewish history, but they find the one group who's anti the state of Israel from its inception, and they say, well, look at those guys. They're religious, they're peaceniks, and they hate the state of Israel and Zionism. Why can you guys be like them? And then they say that anything that someone does, including some type of leader or some type of spokesman who dehumanizes the Palestinians, either because of what they've experienced or whatever, then that must be what you guys are being taught. So I send you the image where they compare an Israeli soldier killing a civilian to a Nazi killing a member of a concentration camp. And they say, look, you become what you hate. And to them, anytime that there's someone who misbehaves, does some type of retaliation, that it is too big to what happened, that it is similar to Nazism. And now they've gone as far as saying that Zionism itself is Nazism because it's supremacist over the previous population. So how would you respond? And I know it's a lot to put on you, between this extreme pacifists like the Neturei Karta, and then this type of accusation that if you do any retaliation, you must be a Nazi, when you feel that a regime of terror is one that brainwashes people to have no regard for civilians and to have their religious goals. And again, we go back to the number one accusation for having done what they did was that since the Mosque of Omar was desecrated, they had the right to attack anybody that stood in their way of their agenda. How would you respond to that? And I know we're running short. When we go to the other side of the break, you can tell us if you are willing to withstand this interrogation. But that's the kind of stuff that that happens, is that the conversation demotes into this type of tit for tat of who's the bigger Nazi, when in reality it's a very complex issue. And again, the term that is used for the return of Jews to the Holy Land is the Nakba. So you're already starting with the assumption that it was a catastrophe and that it was purposeful. They don't take into consideration World War I. They don't take into consideration World War II. They don't take into consideration the British having a mandate or splitting it or doing anything like that. They assume that any Jew being in Palestine was an affront to the people that were there. And I even heard a guy say that we purposely abandoned the Holy Land. And then when we came back, it's kind of like you abandon a house and you come back 30 years later and you say, well, your grandchild comes back and says, give me my house back. And then you're like, what are you talking about? And then, but at the end, it's the same thing with Palestinians. Palestinians would say, well, we left 2 generations ago. Now you need to give it back to the 3rd generation. And how is that fair? And again, Raphael, sorry for putting you through all this abuse in such a sensitive time. But the first thing is, why can't every Israeli and Jew be like the Neturei Karta and just seek peace and wait for the Messiah to give you whatever you are allotted to, versus taking it by force and fighting for it?
Peace is such a strong word. It's a word that I think has many connotations. Peace for some means everybody sitting around a bonfire and singing Kumbaya together. And that sounds like peace. I think it's a delusional peace. There are others that have trained soldiers during peacetime, not because they're training them on somebody, they're aiming them at somebody, but because they need to be ready. I think there's a fine line between wanting peace and being naive. I want peace. I want peace so badly. I don't want to look at my 3-year-old anymore and see her sobbing as she knows rockets are falling out of the sky. I don't want that. That's not something I need. I don't need to be called up my mother after I know a rocket fell 5 minutes from where she was sitting and say, "Are you alive?" I don't need my wife coming back from visiting from the funeral the kids used to babysit and sobbing her head off. I want peace as much as the next guy. But I want to be realistic. I don't want, when I was a kid, I remember I had a friend, not a friend, I had a kid in my class who used to love picking on me. And I used to think that if I would just be nice to him, he would stop picking on me. And I went and I tried, and you know what he did, David? He took advantage. He took everything I tried to give him, and he took it, and he twisted it, and he threw it back at me, and he trampled me, and he absolutely broke me. And I learned something from that. I learned that there are some people that you need to be careful. You need to be careful who you're extending the olive branch to. You know, the disengagement from Gaza was a move that was made for peace, and until today, it's one of the most controversial moves within the state of Israel. It's one of the most controversial moves that Israel has ever made, because you look at what's happened. We gave up the state of Gaza, and now we have all this trouble. We now have 1,400 people dead because Gaza was being used as a terror camp. Do we want peace? Of course we want peace. Do the Neturei Karta want peace? I'm sure they want peace. The difference between me and the Neturei Karta is I think the Neturei Karta don't want to make peace with the wrong people. They kissed Ahmadinejad, a man who said he wants to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. And I say, if that's the person you want to make peace with, then you really gotta re-examine your priorities. You really gotta figure out, maybe you're kissing up to the bully a little too much. And maybe he's gonna take advantage of you. Maybe one day, when you have your back turned because you trusted him so much, he's gonna stab you in it. And like I said, I'm sure there's a peaceful majority in Palestine. But there's also the very aggressive minority. And it's that aggressive minority that we need to be constantly keeping at bay if we are going to survive this war.
So just, I know this is very offensive and hurtful, but this is the kind of stuff that's being thrown at me on Facebook, is that genocide is genocide no matter who does it. So then they point at all the genocides that have happened. And the one they love to bring up is the Native Americans and the 13 colonies. And they say it's exactly the same thing. Europeans came with this superiority complex, and they wanted to take over the land, and they were in their way. So they took all the people that were here, and they either killed them or they put them in these reservations and starved them to death and gave them bones, and look what happened. And it's been a slow genocide, because I've heard from Native Americans that you're only consider a Native American with a card and everything if you're full-blooded. If you start mixing with the current population, then you X yourself out. So it's a slow death. They're saying is the exact same thing. When Jews show up, there's the Arab population, they push them to the sides and they build their country. And then in those sides, they're pinned against Egypt, doesn't want them, or they're pinned against Jordan, doesn't want them. And then slowly, like a ghetto or like a pogrom, they slowly start squeezing until they pop. And now they're bringing up that at one point Netanyahu wanted Hamas to be the prominent party, so then he would have an enemy to fight. How fair is this analogy in comparison? Because then you can always take it to the Nazi thing, where it was similar. You put them in the ghetto, you squeeze, and then when you're not able to destroy them that way, you ship them away to a place where they're fully killed. So Filkenstein was saying that that's what it is. They're concentration camps, and if the people in the concentration camp rise up, how can you blame them?
I'm glad the question's asked. I'll say first about Netanyahu, because I think you also mentioned him before. Anybody who says that this is a conspiracy and that Netanyahu wants all of this has no idea what he's talking about. For the first time, in I think 15 years, I know I came to Israel 16 years ago. I've never seen a poll like this. Polls are saying that Netanyahu's career as prime minister is officially over after this attack. People voted for him because he was strong in security. Once 1,400 of our people are dead, half of his support is running over to the opposition, running over to Benny Gantz. Netanyahu's career as prime minister is over. He will finish this term, and he will not become prime minister again. And anybody who says that there's a conspiracy out there is not looking at the numbers. I think that's number one. Regarding your other point about, I think your question was genocide is genocide, right? Was that your question? Okay. I'm going to say this. I think if some of my Israeli friends will hear me say this now, they'll be very upset at what I'm about to say. I will fully and readily admit, I don't like to hide the truth. I will fully and readily admit that I have friends on Facebook who are calling to flatten Gaza. Go in there and carpet bomb the whole thing. And I'm not with that. I don't agree with that. Okay? And the government doesn't agree with that. The government has the capability. They have the military capability to do it. They're not doing it. This is not something that they want to do. The human rights issue is very important to Israel. You know, just to go through some of the moves that Israel has made for human rights. They've had a policy in the past to notify citizens of an area when they're about to bomb that area. I don't know what other country in the world does that. Israel allows tens of thousands of Gazans to come over into Israel to work because the Gazan economy is so bad. They come into Israel, they work, and they bring their shekels back into Gaza, and they keep the Gazan economy afloat. If we had hated the Gazans, if we had wanted to cause a humanitarian crisis there, we would have sealed the border. We would have done it on the grounds of keeping our people safe, and their economy would have collapsed. We didn't want to do that, David. We don't want their economy to collapse. Now, we issued an evacuation order, not an order, but it's a recommendation. We said, look, we want to start a ground operation in northern Gaza to root out the terrorists that are hiding rocket launchers under your hospitals, inside your schools. We want to root them out. We want to take the terrorists out from your midst. We want to help you. We want to stop them from using you as a human shield. So get out of northern Gaza. Go down to southern Gaza. So we can go into northern Gaza and clean the place up, and afterwards you can come back and live peacefully. We're not seeking to do as a shameful member of Knesset of ours. This man was voted in, and we pay his salary, and it's shameful. He said we are seeking to do an ethnic cleansing, and I say that cannot be further from the truth. We have 2 million Muslims living within our borders. That's 20% of our population. And then there are more Christians and Africans who are atheists on top of that. Okay? We are not seeking to ethnically cleanse Gaza. We never were, we never did, and we certainly are not now. And I'll say this. I'm going to, again, pose the question. If anybody has a suggestion, is there a way to do this? Can people write in? If anybody has a suggestion how to better handle this conflict, I want to hear it. I want to hear the suggestion. Because as of now, like I said, we're caught between a rock and a hard place. We're trying to take into account what we need and what the Gazans need, and it's going to be very difficult to do both.
We'll get ready to get all kinds of nasty comments, because the first thing that people are going to bring up is the blockade has been killing Gazans. It's kind of like the thing they were doing with Iraq. Remember how when Clinton passed it was kind of a blockade or sanctions on the Iraqis, and they were coming up with all kinds of conspiracies that I don't know if they're true or not. They're still trying to figure out that Hussein was killing his own people, gassing them, stuff like that. So then Clinton said, let's just sanction the heck out of them, so then they don't have any resources. And the same thing with Iran and Venezuela. So then the economy starts collapsing because they cannot sell or trade or do anything. And then they become more radicalized because they're desperate. That's what all the pro-Palestinian people would tell you. There's been people from Spain, there's been people from the UN, there's been people from America who have been trying to support the Gazans, and they always get shut down or not allowed to go in because they say, well, we don't know if you're carrying a rocket or you're giving them this or that. So they've been like struggling to survive. And the first thing that they're going to say to you and me is that we've been brainwashed by the Israeli propaganda coming from the Ministry of Communications or whatever like that, and that we don't know the full picture. How would you respond to that accusation? And in 2012, when I contacted Filkenstein, I was saying that Egypt was bombing the tunnels between them and Gaza, so they didn't even want to help them. I would put the blame on the Arab countries that the only way they help the Palestinians is by providing weapons. Are you familiar with that?
That who provides them with weapons? I missed what you said.
The other Arab nations, like what the one thing
Right.
that no one ever brings up is that there's a proxy war between
Right.
Iran,
100%.
Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudis, the Emirates,
Well,
the
now Russia as
Egyptians.
well. Yeah.
They're all giving weapons and propping up the Palestinians and using them as peons so they can attack Israel on all these fronts, and the Palestinians are suffering from that type of support. That's the only support that they truly give them.
Well, I'll say, look, they give them other support, right? There's money from Qatar that goes to humanitarian support. There's all sorts of stuff. I'll say like this. I think first of all, like I said, I think I partly answered your question before about I said Gazans come into Israel to work. We do not have an economic embargo against Gaza. That's ridiculous. It doesn't exist. The one time we did prevent money from going to Gaza was when Qatar gave money to Gaza. It was going through us, and we said, listen, we have to first make sure that this money is not going to end up in the hands of Hamas. And so we worked together with the international community to establish a method that will ensure that this money reaches the hands of the citizens who so desperately need it and will not reach the hands of a terrorist organization. That is the only time we held up money from reaching Gaza. But we have no interest for them to collapse economically. The opposite. I'd say, again, the fact that everybody seeks to militarize them against us, what does that tell you? Who cares about them more? Those who want to use them, or those who say, come into our borders and work? And I'll just say one more thing about that. Is that I lost it. I lost my train of thought. Okay.
Okay, so answer this question, and this is the crux of the problem. As you're going through an Israeli education, I don't know if you went to a private religious school or you went to the public school system, were you being taught from day one, you are the best, you're the most wonderful, everybody else is trash, everybody else does not deserve to live? Were you brainwashed to take up arms and kill your fellow human being because they have no humanity, because they're vampires that attack people when you're at war and in the battlefield, because they're trying to destroy you from within, because they're taking your women? Were you taught any of those Nazi things that Germans and Polish people were taught as kids back in the 1930s? Because that's the accusation. If you say that an Israeli is a Nazi, you're saying that it's not only they're doing Nazi-like things, they have a whole agenda that it is...
They have a superiority complex.
And not only that, it's exterminating anybody that they feel threatened by. Sure. In a book that I'm reading about from a Holocaust survivor, he's saying, anti-Semitism is the worst because it's worse than racism. Not only do you think that they're subhuman, you think that they are amazing. You don't want them around. You don't want them to mix blood with you, but you admire them because they're so capable of going in all forms of government, all culture and society, and slip in and poison it from within. Were you taught that about Palestinians and Arabs growing up?
It's an excellent question. I want to answer that. I just remembered what I wanted to say about the last question. So if that's okay, I'll just finish that thought. And that is, you had asked about collective economic sanctions against Gazans and how it's not fair, causes a humanitarian crisis. And I'll just say, look, that's a method of warfare that the United States still uses. Do you want to lift sanctions from North Korea? Do you want to lift sanctions from Iran? Do you want to lift sanctions from Russia? In all these places, the people are experiencing a humanitarian crisis, most of all in North Korea. The people there are experiencing terrible humanitarian crises. There's a shortage of food. It's terrible. But our only way to fight against North Korea is through that form of collective punishment. And so I'd say, before you come to Israel and you ask us about, about collective punishment, I'd say take a good look at what's happening at home, because the United States is imposing these very same economic sanctions, or not same because we're not even doing it, but they're imposing economic sanctions on other countries around the world. Now, to your question about, were we, I suppose, radicalized? Were we taught that other people hate us and we should slaughter them and we should, whatever? It's so sad to me that people might think that this is the case, because I'm just, you asked me this question, David, and it brought me back. It brought me back. Whoa, many years ago. I was in, I don't remember if it was third grade or second. I was very young, and we were in class, and we started to learn about the temple sacrifices. And there was one detail in there that really, killing the animals never really, it didn't hurt me too much. I mean, I'm a meat eater. What can I say? I felt we were killing them in a very humane way, and so it didn't bother me. But there was one point where I felt that it might be painful or scary to the animal. And so I spoke up, and I asked my teacher, I said, why are we causing pain to this animal? And we had a conversation about it right there in class. And the teacher answered me he began by quoting the verse in Psalms where it says that that God is merciful to all his creations. And we had a discussion in class about not being too cruel to this poor goat in the temple sacrifices. And I'll say this, I cannot imagine the upbringing that I received, the Jewish education I've received, how it was always focused on mercy and to love others and to care for others. Even those Gazans who I feel sent, I don't know if I don't think they sent them, but their country sent terrorists to come and kill my people. I feel bad for the peaceful people in there who just wanted to end. I do. And that, more than anything else, falls in line with the Jewish education that I received.
Again, Raphael, we want to thank you for your time and for your patience. I know it's been a very difficult conversation to have while people are grieving. You and I had a special bonding conversation about what your family has gone through. And it's painful that when someone is the victim of a crime, just like in domestic violence and sexual assault, the first thing they're going to do is, what were you doing when that took place? And that's what they're doing to the Israeli community. They're saying, what did you guys do to incite this or to provoke this to happen? And we can go through history and talk about what everybody's been through. But a Hasidic teacher who has a podcast was saying that when you become cynical and you say, well, what's the point of even being righteous when there's so much suffering in the world and at any point you can die? Then that the person who was trying to cause harm has won. They have not only taken the life of the people you love, but they've taken your hope. So we pray that everyone, even the people who are filled with hatred, that they'll find hope in nonviolent ways, and they can communicate their suffering, their struggle, their grief in healthy ways, and that we support people who are working with each other and creating opportunities for peace. And we want to give that to your family, your friends, your fellow Israelis, as well as to the Palestinian people who have their own struggle and their own plight. But again, we thank you for sharing your experience and taking all these very difficult questions that are creating grief on themselves. Like, how can you make everything about your narrative when it's actually, we're having it happen as we speak? There's a lot of more suffering that is coming and a lot of more suffering that is happening, and we can't not be sensitive to that. So again, blessings to you and your family. I hope you guys stay safe, and we pray that everybody will find the peace they're seeking.
Thank you, David. And on that note, I agree with you. We want peace. I want to be able to run to my brothers in Gaza and to give them a big hug and say it's over. Let's all come together. And hopefully, that day will come soon. Be'ezrat Hashem, inshallah, as they say in Arabic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.